Hey, this is Jarquez Hunter, and you're listening to Devy Devotional.
Welcome in to the Devy Devotional Podcast, a show devoted to all things Devy and C2C. Hosted by John Arrington and Aaron Wilcox. This dynamic duo brings you actionable strategies with player-driven analysis for your Devy and C2C leagues. Let's dive in.
Let's dive into the freshman recruits. Well, welcome into the Devy Devotional, where we stay devoted to Devy. I'm your host, Dynasty Coach A, joined as always by Aaron Wilcox. That's Aaron Wilcox 86 on Twitter. And tonight, like I said, we're going to be diving into that all-important freshman recruit class of 2028. That's when they'll be, ready to go to the NFL at least. So we're talking about the future here. But you know what? Guess what? It's actually important. There's going to be some big names regardless. There's always at least a few big names that come out of every class. And, some classes like last year's end up being even more than that. So a lot to talk about tonight. Obviously, I've been doing a lot of work with Fresh Beth and everything. I started that last year. Been tweaking it here and there, trying to make it, even more, more usable, more viable, and just, having an idea of who these freshmen are, where I didn't really used to in the past. I always relied on Aaron, which, by the way, we got to check in. How are you doing, Aaron?
Hey, doing well. And as you know, I love looking into the future draft classes. So getting into these incoming freshman recruits, it's always a treat. And I kind of wait till later in the process, usually until their senior seasons are concluded, to actually start diving in. For better, for worse. I think at the end of the day, I get that most recent and complete look at their profile versus if you start really early into their high school career, you can be really biased about a guy who's a late bloomer, or maybe he just kind of faded down the stretch. He just was, injuries otherwise impacted his production. But at the end of the day, I like getting that complete look in at these guys, both production wise and also just analyzing their film and just seeing how they play the game. And we got to factor in all these different factors, the landing spot even included in that. So it's a fun process. Enjoy it every year. And I'm glad that, like you said, you've been tweaking your model and you're ready to talk some freshmen today.
Yeah, if I could unmute. I was thinking about it. We had Jarquez Hunter open us up, as with the intro. And, looking back to his freshman season, that's when I fell in love with Hunter. That's where I said he is that much better than Tank Bigsby, and that was both of us. We were sitting there going, all right, well, so Tank's not very good, but this Jarquez Hunter guy, 89 rushes for 593 yards, 6.7 yards per carry, 3 touchdowns as a true freshman. Like that was, it was time to get excited about him. Now, unfortunately, I don't think he was a good enough recruit for us to truly care about him like we are going to talk about tonight. But, that happens as well. I don't know. You were doing stuff back then. Did you care about Jarquez Hunter when before he became I don't want to say household name, but more of a name?
He was definitely not a priority for me. So whether it was just the depth that I was going at that time, maybe not quite as in depth as the last year or so. But yeah, I remember him coming in, but at the end of the day, what he did early in his career at Auburn, it was notable for sure.
Absolutely. We got Jamie in the chat. It's Optimus time. That's right. We are here, hoping to have more and more Optimus stuff coming around here soon. But, for no matter what, Devy Devotional is always here. So we record whenever we can. In fact, we don't normally go on Monday nights, but here we are just making it happen so that we can get it in. But why don't we... Well, first of all, why don't we take a look at last year's class real quick? And we don't have to go crazy with it or anything like that. But just because, especially at the wide receiver position, there were so many hits. And I want to see if there was anything that we can take away from that. Now, obviously, this is the Uh, Jamie says, "Are we going to talk about Jax DeJean, Cooper's brother?" I don't know what position he's to play. Maybe we will talk about him. I don't know. Aaron looks stumped too, so I'm not 100% sure. No, so last year, looking at the wide receivers, it was the first year that I made Fresh Beth, and I want and this isn't all about me, like calling myself out or anything like that. I had some definite misses as well. But Cam Coleman stuck out in Fresh Beth last year as a player that she loved. And especially in the beginning, in the early stages, it seemed like there were not very many analysts that were in on Coleman. A lot of people saying he's going to be too slow. He's that prototypical X. He's not really what the NFL is doing anymore. Blah blah blah. It's kind of funny now. Fast forward 12 months, and it seems like every wide receiver that we're looking at in the NFL draft right now is that prototypical X and all that kind of stuff. So that's kind of hilarious. Just in this draft class, there's so many more of them. So it's kind of funny how everything comes full circle. But and I will give people credit because we had a lot of people come on as guests and analysts. We did mock drafts, we did everything, and everyone seemed to kind of come around to Cam Coleman. But is there anything to take away there? So we can avoid that mistake or be even quicker in getting to that point.
Yeah. So speaking of getting there quicker, Cam Coleman was a riser. So again, in the very beginning of the show, I mentioned how if you've been following these guys for years, you might be a little slower to come around on the idea that Cam Coleman is actually good. So he was big time producer as a senior, both like 1,300 receiving yards, 22 yards per reception. So very efficient, explosive, 18 receiving touchdowns. And his junior season wasn't that impressive. So that was a big jump up. And he was just he became a top 3 wide receiver for every recruiting service. We got to take note of that. He was a 5-star prospect. Cam Coleman had a good athletic background, basketball background, and he seemed like he had good athleticism. I mean, like the speed was there. Was he a technician yet? No. So I guess that's an understandable hesitation out of everybody. And also it's like Auburn, that was, I guess, the argument that you and I had last year of like, how high do we want to put him? Just because he's an SEC is going to score well in a model? Sure. How good is Auburn at developing wide receivers? Always a question. So yes, there's reasons for why folks would have been lower on him, but you and I both did like him. I had him top 5 in the class last year, and certainly glad I did because he's been awesome so far. And out of the 2 guys at Auburn, I'm glad that I had Perry Thompson outside of my top 10 because now it seems like Cam Coleman and what's his name? The other wide receiver there are ahead of Perry Thompson at this point. So there are some things like I was happy that I had Bryant Wesco. He was ahead of JoJo Trader, Mylan Graham, Perry Thompson, Jeremiah McClellan for me. So, like the Bryant Wesco, I'm glad that has worked out so far as well. So sometimes if these guys have really promising production and maybe the film to complement that, like Bryant Wesco had an insane yards per team pass attempt and yards share. Like he's just dominant within his offense. Those things should stick out to us in high school if you're able to look in depth like that. And he was a 5-star at 1.2. Brian Wesco didn't fall because he was bad. He fell because TJ Moore was a riser for Clemson as well. Another stud freshman from last year.
So on the other end of the spectrum, Fresh Beth had JoJo Trader, Josiah Trader, as a top 6, as wide receiver 6 in the class. And obviously we know that he did not have a spectacular year. He technically did not break the year 1-0 theory, or thresholds that they're looking for, although he was at 91 yards and the threshold they're looking for is 100 yards. So I do question when we get that close, is it an exact science, or, can we go ahead and say, hey, maybe like he, maybe he would have tripped and got 9 yards on the next play or something like that.
Yeah, right. I mean, JoJo Trader, he actually, for being in an offense that had so much established talent, there's a ton of opportunity there. And he showcased, especially at the end of the year, that he has some nice ability. So it's just getting on the field in an incredibly crowded situation. I guess there is still some hope alive. Like you said, he didn't technically break that threshold, but I saw enough to be intrigued by him. Kind of same thing with Mike Matthews, because I remember you were pretty high on him as a freshman last season. And I was fairly high as well. I mean, big time playmaker, but not the most nuanced. And Tennessee's not known for coaching guys up with that nuanced part of the wide receiver game. But at the end of the day, Mike Matthews didn't quite break that year 1-0 mark, but Matthews at least came close. He at least showed us that he's alive, and he very much could factor in there for next year at Tennessee.
And then that makes me think of, like you were saying with JoJo Trader, it was difficult for him to get on the field. We still don't really know who he is. Is he going to blow up this year and be a stud all of a sudden? Is he gonna, or is the year 1-0 theory going to like take another victim and say, nope, you didn't do it, so it's not going to happen? But it makes me think of somebody like a Carnell Tate out of Ohio State. Like there was a lot of people that were down on him after year 1 because, like, yeah, he got on the field, he broke the year 1-0 theory, but at the same time, he didn't exactly have like the big explosive plays that some people wanted to see. They started to have questions about his athleticism, things like that, because it was a small sample. We didn't really get to see a lot of them. Then he goes and still, he's not really a full-time player because we have Emeka Egbuka, we have Jeremiah Smith ahead of him, but he definitely plays a lot more this past season. Now all of a sudden he's kind of a consensus top 10 wide receiver for everyone. Like no big deal. Do we need to discount these players that are going into these, or do we need to just say, hey, with these kind of players, we're probably going to have to give a little bit of leeway and give a little more time?
Yeah, it's tough. I mean, even in that situation, he did break year 1-0 numbers not this last season, but the year before for Carnell Tate. But I mean, you have to give some leeway. But last year, for example, we're looking at the incoming freshman from this last season, Mylan Graham, going to Ohio State. If he was good enough, he would have got on the field. He would have done something. Same thing the year before with Brandon Inniss. There were still people having Brandon Inniss pretty high in Devy rankings last year. I mean, most people reacted accordingly with that year 1-0 status, but people will hang on sometimes for a long time with these promising prospects. I'm not necessarily like all in on that theory. Is it like a 100% type of hit rate? There are going to be outliers. There are going to be very, very viable fantasy producers for C2C leagues, CFF leagues, who were year 1-0s, sure. But for Devy potential, it does make a big difference. So yes, you kind of have to take those things into consideration sometimes with these guys coming in. So if there's a guy coming into Ohio State or Clemson or something like that, this class, you might be a little bit nervous. You got to look in depth and make sure that player is actually good, because these crowded wide receiver rooms and talented wide receiver rooms, you have to be top notch to really crack that rotation and pass that year 1-0 and actually start to get some momentum for your collegiate career.
Absolutely. So, I mean, it's definitely not a perfect science. I'm even looking through it. Like Carnell Tate was graded worse than Noah Rogers and Brandon Inniss in that class, I believe. Or he definitely was below Rogers, and then Inniss was ahead of him as well. So it's it's hard to say as far as like the composite grades and everything. And I know some people swear by them, some people hate them. Take it with a grain of salt. But I'm just saying, you have 3 players that are all going to the same team. How do you make that determination of who's better? Because I remember there was a lot of people in the beginning that were all in on Inniss. Then Carnell Tate kind of came around in the spring and started looking better, and everyone was like, all right, nope, never mind, I'm all in on Tate. And there's some people that were in on Noah Rogers and all that. So it's I don't know. We haven't quite figured all that out, but obviously we want to focus on the players that are going to these high-end schools, these high-end programs that have done very well with their recruiting. It's just you got to hope you find the right one.
Right. Sometimes there is that hope, but there is that late drum beat for these early enrollees. So that's one thing we look for. Have you enrolled early? Have you got on campus early enough to actually make an impact in practice, get the coaches to trust you, and actually play you as a true freshman? And then B, what is the hype there? Not just being an early enrollee, but do you hear some sort of buzz out of spring camp? Are they getting some run with the first team offense or at least second team offense right away, and then making some buzz heading into fall camp in the summer and all that? So guys who did that last year, Ryan Wingo totally was a guy I tanked down my rankings. I was like, nah, don't really like him. I don't think he's gonna be top 10 because the film in high school didn't really match up. I didn't think that there was nuance there as a wide receiver, this and that, but the athleticism, the recruiting, borderline 5-star status, the landing spot at Texas, all intriguing. The size, very good too. And then you started here in the spring, oh, the coaches want to involve him. Oh, they're gonna somehow get him on the field no matter what it takes, no matter what the role is. Ryan Wingo is going to play despite all the talent and highly rated recruits there and all that. So that was one of those cases. I would say the same thing kind of happening with Bryant Wesco and TJ Moore. And, we go down the list. These guys are making buzz. They're making the most of those early opportunities and impressing. So by the time your summer supplemental drafts roll around, you actually have a pretty good idea of some guys that are trending up and looking pretty good. And like you said, the rest of the guys, you kind of just have to hope that they make it work, the hope that they pan out, because we know you're never going to get 100% hit rates, even if you're as tuned in as you can be into spring reports and all that. There's things that happen, but there are indicators, certainly early enrollee status and buzz early in camp, that can give you a further advantage as a fantasy player and just looking at the recruits.
Yeah, absolutely. One thing that I've picked up on, and once again, it's not a perfect science. Nothing's ever going to be 100%, but the high end wide receivers, the ones that have your composite score of 0.995 and above, something around there, that really high end score, they really tend to hit a lot. And once again, it's not perfect, but going all the way, I have Freshbeth going all the way back to 2018 to that recruiting class. And Amon-Ra St. Brown, 0.9948. Obviously we know that he's a hit. Now we have Terrace Marshall, 0.9930, obviously not a hit, but I really think it's like the 0.995 and above, or like right around that range, that end up hitting the next year, or maybe it's 0.994. I don't know. There's a threshold there somewhere. The next year, Emeka Egbuka, 0.9945. Or no, for some reason I don't. Oh, it's because of 2020. Okay, I skipped to 2021. Emeka Egbuka, 0.9945. Obviously, we know he's going to be a stud. We know he's been great in college. We're expecting him to be a stud in the NFL. Moving on. Funny enough, Luther Burden, 0.9974, which is hilarious, but we'll have to see if it continues, if he ends up being a hit in the NFL or not. And then let's see, that's 22, 23. Zachariah Branch, another one, 0.9980. So now we see 2 years in a row where maybe it's not working out, but then we get into 2024, Jeremiah Smith, 0.9997. Obviously, we know we're assuming he's a stud. Ryan Williams, 0.9982, a stud. Cam Coleman, 0.9985. We're expecting another stud. So, we're seeing that. And we have one player, all that to say, we have one player in this wide receiver class, the 2025 wide receiver class, that is above a 0.995. Can you tell me who that player is?
DeCorian Moore?
DeCorian Moore going to Oregon.
So safe. They're so safe. I just want to rewind. I think everybody's excited and anxious for us to get to this year's recruiting class and freshmen. But going back to 2022, you listed off Luther Burden there for 247. They had Evan Stewart at wide receiver 1 as a 5-star. And then Luther Burden, obviously we know that there's a solid chance that he gets day 1 draft capital, maybe day 2. Again, that's not the end all be all. He has some volatility as a prospect, but as far as hits go for 5 stars, it's pretty solid. And then Tet McMillan at wide receiver 4 in that class, that's pretty impressive. I have to say. So Tet McMillan being like in the top 4, the recruiting services are getting better and better at identifying these top end guys. So to your point, we want to listen when these guys are rated pretty highly there in the composite, especially if they're that elite, like a 5-star level. But even some of the top 5 type of guys, as long as they have a decent enough grade, we should be taking notes at least. That's for sure.
Yeah, like I said, it's not perfect. Even going back to that 2018 class, which we have a great answer of who's good and who's not from. Justin Shorter was actually the number 1 wide receiver in that class, and so it's not a perfect science by any means. But I've just noticed the hit rates from that level of prospect are pretty damn good, and so it's something that we want to keep an eye on. Now, I personally have a little bit of issue with Decorian Moore, and I wasn't necessarily trying to move us over, although, if you're ready to, we can go ahead and move over to the 25 class. I was just trying to show that there was a point to what I was trying to say, that all these top end players, are looking pretty good for the most part, except for Luther Burden, of course. And then, but Decorian Moore is looking like another potential stud here. I don't love the Oregon landing spot though, and so that's where I mean, he's still the wide receiver 1 in FreshBeth, but I'll tell you what, he's tied with 3 other players. 4 other, yeah, he's tied with 3 other players. So, that's probably different than I would say consensus, because it seems to me everything I've heard is nope, Decorian Moore is number 1, and then we start getting into these other players. But when you start thinking about what Oregon has done, yeah, everyone loves Bucky Irving and everything, but think about what they've done as far as wide receivers. Troy Franklin was supposed to be a 2nd-round pick in the NFL draft. He was supposed to be a stud. He was a 4th-round pick in the NFL draft. And I mean, we've seen some flashes and stuff out of him, and he has not had nearly enough time. So we can't say like the book is closed on him. But that didn't really work out. And then, what other wide receivers has Oregon really put out, in the recent past that we can say, hey man, like they're really recruiting well, putting players into the NFL well, like that kind of thing. Yeah, they seem to have some fun teams, and even obviously they're in the mix for Heisman's and national championships and all that kind of stuff. It doesn't seem to be translating to the NFL as much. So can we get overly excited about Decorian Moore? Can we say that he's that kind of talent where it doesn't really matter and he's just going to be different? Because we've kind of already said that about your people were getting really excited about Jurian Dickey. And I know obviously it's a completely different prospect, completely different story here. But it just seems like there's been quite a few players that we've gone, hey, this player's going to be that next stud. And then it just doesn't really happen.
Yeah. I mean, I see a lot of, I guess, supreme confidence in that Decorian Moore is just a can't miss type of wide receiver prospect. And is that fair or not? I guess I don't know that it's fair that we put that on the kid, because I mean, just that transition to college is hard enough in general, but he has that insane speed though. I mean, you're checking off a lot of boxes here. So this is Oregon moving to a higher level of competition than they used to be right in the Pac-12. And he's a 5-star. He has 10.4 speed in the 100. That's really fast. And that speed translates onto the field. It's not just testing speed. So on the field, his acceleration, his quickness, his speed, it's all great. And he's not some sort of small player who's just, little pop passes like Zachariah Branch. I mean, he has a little bit of size of 5'11", 180. I think he's going to ultimately end up being between a 5'11" and 6 foot and maybe like 190 plus. So I think he'll be plenty big enough for today's NFL. And he actually shows the ability to high point the ball and make these difficult catches and track the ball well downfield. So I think that he's not only a force after the catch, but then with some natural route running ability and, being able to be deployed all over the field, I think Oregon's going to be forced to have to utilize him. They have some other guys that can at least contribute. That's great. That way, maybe they can have the luxury of deploying Decorian Moore deep as like an Evan Stewart or somebody like that works more in that underneath to intermediate role. I think Moore is going to be a top 2 type of target in that offense this upcoming season. And that's great for him to be able to hit that year 1-0 theory. I know it's scary. For folks who are thinking or seeing the past Oregon wide receiver trajectory, right? It hasn't been pretty in recent years, but they also haven't had a guy of that type of caliber coming in as a freshman. So you want to be scared of landing spot? Well, you certainly could be scared last year with TJ Moore and Bryant Wesco at Clemson, because it's like it had been years since we had seen Clemson actually put together competent enough quarterback play paired with good wide receiver play. I get Clemson has a rich history in the past, but that's not the recent past, right? Not recent history. And then you also see the same thing out of Auburn. Auburn cannot, cannot do anything for wide receiver development. Well, Cam Coleman came in there, he smashed that, and Malcolm Simmons, and these good players, I guess, are ultimately going to ball if it's a math landing spot or if it's great landing spot. And I think even if you think Oregon's not the best spot, a guy of his talent, I think, will ultimately shine.
No, I tend to agree, and like I said, I've definitely picked up on those high end players doing pretty well in the model. So we'll have to see how he does. He ends up at the top there, but then we get into kind of a grouping that's really difficult for me, at least. And I'm sure that we're gonna rank these players differently and everything, so it'll be fine. But I'm just gonna go. I have 3 players tied after that, but they're all kind of going to ambiguous situations, and it's kind of hard to say, is this going to end up turning out well, or is or do we just have to hope for the best? Is this going to be a slow draw where we have to like kind of play it out with like maybe like a Carnell Tate or something? Like, could it possibly be even slower than that, like a Brandon Ennis or somebody like that? And that brings us to, I have Khalil Lockett, Talon Taylor, and Quincy Porter. And Lockett's going to Texas, Taylor's going to Georgia, and Porter's going to Ohio State. Now, I've seen Porter get completely buried in people's ranks, and I'm assuming it's just because they're saying Jeremiah Smith's already there, Carnell Tate's already there, so it's just going to be so difficult for him to get on the field. But, I mean, honestly, he has a pretty solid grade as far as the composite grade. He's going to Ohio State. We've seen crazier things happen. He's graded out as a recruit higher than Carnell Tate, higher than Brandon Ennis, higher than Noah Rogers, like higher than a lot of these players. So could Porter carve out a role, or at least a small role? And are people maybe not giving him enough credit? Obviously, we know Georgia doesn't put out the greatest wide receivers, or doesn't do as well for their wide receivers. And there's a lot of players there right now, but it's not completely, like, no one's truly locked in as like these are the studs moving forward. We can't really say that. So is it possible that Talon Taylor could make a move once again, a highly ranked recruit here? And then Khalil Lockett, the highest graded of the 3, going to Texas with Arch Manning. They lost Jonte Cook. They lost Matthew Golden. They lost Isaiah Bond. Could Khalil Lockett make a big move in year 1?
Absolutely. So to start that off, yes, Khalil Lockett could certainly just be a baller year 1 right away. He ultimately fell off a little bit at his senior year, which is a bit concerning, but obviously these recruit services are not bought in to that, or not panicking just because his efficiency dropped. Part of that was how he was utilized within that offense. He still looked great in the All-American Bowl practices, unlike French, his Jamie French, who is also another incoming talented freshman wide receiver. Khalil Lockett looked better when they were just comparison-wise, both at the All-American Bowl. Khalil Lockett was the one that was flashing, and he flashes really nicely on the field with both some balance and run after the catch. He shows great jump ball abilities. I think his route running is going to be fine, at least with foundational skills being there. So I think being a 5-star going to Texas with a 6'2", 175-pound frame, like Khalil Lockett, he has a lot of things that you're looking for there. And I do think some of his struggles his senior season were because of that quarterback. Just did not seem impressive when I was watching that quarterback play. So Khalil Lockett, I really think he's going to be able to have a fair shot at locking down an outside role there at Texas. So yeah, certainly a good bet. And I like the other guys you mentioned there too. Talon Taylor going to Georgia. I think, he film-wise, he is just so fun. I think the comps that I assign to him are going to be much better than the Kalik Lockett comps, actually. I think Taylor on the field, I mean, he looks like Malik Neighbors. He looks Odell Beckham Jr. like, or Jordan Addison like, at least as kind of a more middle tier comp. Still a very good player. Jordan Addison was a great recruit, or at least a great player coming out of college. So he just looks like he gets how to play the position. He's very smooth. He looks really nice on the field, good at varying his speeds and route running, and his hands are great. His production is very great. Yeah, there's a lot going his way. It's just how much do you buy into him getting developed and getting a lot of time at Georgia? Taylor has the talent. I just hope that Georgia will develop him. And then the last guy you mentioned is Quincy Porter, and I'm the lowest on Quincy Porter out of those three. He's not in my top 5 right now, unfortunately, and he has everything that you're looking for. Besides, he just doesn't look good out there on the field. Like, he has the production. He on paper, he's dominant, right? He's on a dominant team in New Jersey. He was a touchdown machine, great shares, everything. 6'3", 200 pounds, 5-star going to Ohio State. It's like, yeah, Quincy Porter should be amazing. He should be the next coming of Jeremiah Smith, and etc. And you put on the field, and it's just limited speed. He's an 11-1 guy, so he's not very fast. On film, he looks even more limited. He looks slow. I just don't really think that he has the movement abilities to be a difference maker at the NFL level. Maybe he can develop at Ohio State. They're amazing at getting these guys just better at the wide receiver position and those skills. But I'm just wondering, he's somewhere on that Nico Collins to Devin Funchess type of scale. And that's not a great scale to be on. But hey, if you're that Nico Collins, you get that high-end outcome. There's potential for Quincy Porter. He's still a top 10 guy for me in this class. It's just I have some obvious concerns based on the film that I've seen. If anybody has some further like clips that they want to send my way to convince me otherwise, hey, they're certainly welcome to. I've watched him the most out of this class because I'm obsessed with trying to get where's the hype or where's the technical and these just next level type of skills for Quincy Porter. I watch him I've tried to watch him many different times this offseason, and I just don't get it.
Hey, I mean, at least we know that you've done your due diligence. So, I mean, if you're going to be out on him, then I might follow suit with you. And it seems like a lot of people are. So, I mean, I have not really seen his name thrown around there as much as you would think for a 5-star wide receiver going to Ohio State. And I'm just playing devil's advocate here. I'm not arguing with you at all because, like I said, I get for every Jeremiah Smith, for every Emeka Egbuka, for every even Marvin Harrison Jr., there's 5 other wide receivers that went to Ohio State that didn't work out, So like there has to be the ones that fail for the other ones to thrive. So it absolutely could be that. But weren't they making like similar comparisons or similar, weren't there similar issues with Marvin Harrison Jr. when he was going into college to Ohio State? He's not athletic enough. He's slow. He's raw. He's like, things like that. I'm just wondering, like you said, they might see something special with this kid. And, it's weird that he's graded as high as he is. Because even a lot of the players that we've seen go there recently that haven't worked out haven't been graded as high as he is. And so like it gives me a little bit of hope with them, but from what you're saying, maybe I should just be all out.
Yeah, no, I'm not telling anybody to be all out because ultimately he's still top 10 for me. There's all those things on paper that are very intriguing. At the end of the day, I mean, Marvin Harrison Jr. was a great route runner. He was just somebody coming out of high school. You could tell that the movement skills were there. I don't know that we have that fluidity and route running prowess out of a Quincy Porter. Probably my biggest concern with Porter besides the athleticism thing. So, in some ways similar to Marvin Harrison Jr. And, it's funny because Marvin Harrison Jr. was rated much lower as a recruit compared to Quincy Porter. So coming out of high school,
much lower.
Yeah, right. So that's kind of surprising to see Quincy Porter that much higher. But I'm sure everybody's like, well, he's going to Ohio State. He dominated in high school. He must be good. There's hesitations there. I am curious. Do you have Jerome Miles up there? Because that is the only guy left from that like top tier that I really, really like and I want to include. And that he's going to Texas A&M.
he's my next player, but he's technically a very slight teardrop the way that Fresh Beth works. Extremely small teardrop from those three. Although I did just lower Quincy Porter a little bit just because of what you said. So now it's actually a two-way or a three-way tie between DeCorian Moore, Kalik Lockett, and Taylor Taylor. That's my three-way tie. Then we have a slight tier break to Jerome Miles. And honestly, it's just Texas A&M. I mean, who's quarterback right now? We have Marcel Reed throwing him the ball, and it's the same exact argument I made last year with Micah Hudson. And I'm not saying just because I was right about Micah Hudson last year that it's I can't even say that I was right about Micah Hudson. He seems like he has some head case issues and stuff like that too. So I mean, it's just one example. We can't say it's a perfect thing here, but I didn't like the fact that people kind of came around, but there were people that had Micah Hudson as their wide receiver one in the class at some point, especially early on in the whole thing. Seemed like everyone kind of came around to Jeremiah Smith later on in the process. But, just the fact that people were even considering Micah Hudson as the wide receiver one going to Texas Tech, and it was like, who the hell's throwing him the ball? How is this guy going to be this amazing player? Yeah, of course we can say he's that talented, but you still have to, in order to stay up at that level, what you're investing in, you want to have someone that can actually throw him the ball. Are we trusting Marcel Reed to throw the ball to Jerome Miles and to keep him up there at that level to where we go, no, this guy's still a top 3 wide receiver in the class. Not like, oh, this guy's a sleeper because he has such a good market share, even though his numbers suck. I love him. That's not the same exact thing. And so it is a small tier break. And I told Aaron before we hopped on, that was one of the things that I did this year was I didn't want the lower level programs and stuff like that to take it away as much. And so I'm not knocking him as much this year as I did Micah Hudson last year, but I'm still giving him a little bit of a knock. And I'm just saying no, I will take those 3 players ahead and then I'll start worrying about him.
Yeah. I mean, it's a fair, we'll say precaution to take there. I will push back a little bit of, like last year, for example, Auburn, got a nice bump. I don't know if it got the same weighted bump as an Alabama or some program that more often puts out wide receiver prospects, but Texas A&M being in the SEC, I think a lot better than Micah Hudson going to the Big 12, for example, for sure. And I will say that Jerome Miles, he would show up even better in your model. He would be probably the wide receiver 2 in this class if he didn't tear his ACL early his senior year. That has kind of allowed him to bump down. I mean, he's still a 5-star, so everybody recognizes the talent is there if he can bounce back and be healthy. He was the state champ in the 100-meter dash. He's a 10.3 guy. That's faster than DeCorian Moore. And guess how big Jerome Miles is? He's 6'3", 215. DeCorian Moore is 5'11", 180. So at 6'3", 215, he's faster than DeCorian Moore. And he's been very productive and explosive. He's not just some sort of straight line type of guy. He's a physical player. He's great at the catch point, tracking the ball. But the issue is the injury thing. He's been injured. He had an ankle injury his junior year, then ACL tear his senior year. I think that there's a lot of things that you can be hesitant about with Jerome Miles, including that landing spot, like you said. But I think ultimately, if he's healthy, it's not really going to matter. Even if they don't have a great quarterback year one, he's going to do enough to break that year 1-0 and enough to flash out there. Should be back up to full health by year 2. It's just you're rolling the dice. So I have no problem at all saying he should be 4. I think I have him at 4 as well. So it's I think we agree with that. There's just a lot to be excited about. He could be the best in this class if healthy.
Sure. Yeah, I'm just saying, and once again, it's not even like Georgia's the perfect landing spot, or even Oregon or even Texas. They all kind of have their hits and misses and everything. So I don't know. Honestly, and it might just be the new world that we live in with NIL and stuff like that. I mean, can we even say that there's any landing spots besides LSU and Ohio State that are even that spectacular for wide receivers? I mean, it just seems to be a lot of misses, and then especially now we're getting all these transfers in and stuff, and it's we're going back to Texas. Where did Isaiah Bond come from? Where did Matthew Golden come from? Where did AD Mitchell come from? Okay, well, that's three players that I don't necessarily love, but they're all going to get drafted very well. And then you actually have Xavier Worthy, who is a stud and was actually recruited by them. So it's like, well, they did pretty well on that one, but what about all the other, John Tate Cooks and other players like that? So it's difficult. I mean, this is I enjoy it, but I'll tell you what, it is frustrating to sit here and go, well, yeah, I mean, it's a high-end program. They get players drafted to the NFL. Are they great at recruiting? I don't know.
Yeah, that's fair, right? Texas brought in a bunch of those guys, Isaiah Bond and who do you say, AD Mitchell and Matthew Golden. All of them were transfers in from elsewhere. So they ended up at Texas, not recruited by Texas. That's a good point. But I think it's worth shouting out some more names here. I don't know if you want to list off some, if you want me to. I really don't care here, John. But there are some more guys in this class that I am excited about at the wide receiver position.
So I have two more players that are technically tied with Miles here. And so I'll be interested to see how you feel about them, because I think what I've seen from some rankings and things, I believe that I'm going to end up being higher on one of these players than a lot of people, or it seems like. So we'll have to see how you feel about him. But I have Vernell Brown the third going to Florida and Caleb Cunningham going to Ole Miss as my next two players. And I guess there's a couple players here. We can go ahead and a little further down, but there's also Dallas Wilson going to Florida as well. And so it seems like we have some people putting Wilson ahead of Brown. But, looking at obviously going to the same exact landing spot, looking at just the composite score, Brown is ranked pretty highly compared to Wilson there. How do you have them ranked, and do you have an explanation for that?
Yeah. So I'm there with you on Caleb Cunningham. He is firmly in the top 6 for me. A type of borderline 5-star wide receiver who is going to Ole Miss. So Caleb Cunningham, talented guy. I think he has enough speed, enough physicality, some of the raw skills. I think he can at least develop the route running. He has, though he's not polished yet, I guess. Ole Miss does a nice job of developing wide receivers. You can loop, kind of, lump them in with some of the Alabamas and the Texas and some of those maybe tier 2 wide receiver landing spots. Like, they're good landing spots for sure. If you end up at Ole Miss, they have a rich tradition of putting out good wide receiver products. It's just they're not maybe that quite elite caliber. So a lot of things to like about Caleb Cunningham, except he's going to be 19 years old or he already is 19 years old, I believe, as a senior in high school. So he's very old. But I think that's the biggest concern with him. But I still have him high. I think ultimately Ole Miss is going to need some playmakers there in the next few years, and he could be one of them. But I think the other guy you mentioned there will be a polarizing player for folks. It really depends on what you're looking for. You are historically not a Zachariah Branch fan. As a freshman, I think you were open to the idea, but obviously just, that got shut down just with his lackluster freshman production, right?
It's just like, it's like Eugene Wilson at Florida. I feel like they're very similar players, and and especially at least how they're utilized. They might not be the same build or whatever, but I just don't love those players that are, around the line of the scrimmage type players, not really route runners, just using athleticism to win. Like, of course I want you to be athletic, but I want you to be so much more than that. Is that what Vernell Brown is?
Yeah. You were leading me to my comp, because guess my comp for him, John.
Don't say Eugene Wilson.
Zachariah Branch.
Oh, that's even worse. No.
So, and that's the thing about Vernell Brown is he's going to Florida where they already have Eugene Wilson,
right,
who's just more experienced in that role. He's probably going to be the starter. Vernell Brown cannot play on the outside, in my opinion. At least, okay. I don't think that's where he projects. He's 5'11", 170. So, kind of diminutive size-wise. Like you said, he's a late riser in the process to 5-star status for good reason. He, on the surface, had very good production in Florida. He played both ways on the field. He was efficient in yards per team pass attempt. He's an explosive track and triple jump guy. So, but he thrives in that underneath role. He's just going to be getting these short passes, these screens, these little bubble screens, all sorts of things that you don't want to see if you're trying to eventually project as a well-rounded NFL wide receiver in the future. So I think, Wan'Dale Robinson type of wide receiver, Zachariah Branch, you're looking at a guy like that he's quick, twitchy, he has balance, he can break off big plays. Is this sounding like Zachariah Branch's profile? Because I think that there's a lot of similarities there. Not saying that he's doomed to that. Maybe they, out of necessity, say at Florida, like, we already have Eugene Wilson in the slot. Let's try you outside, Vernell, and see if you can transform your game. I think that Dallas Wilson going to Florida, you already mentioned him. I have him slightly higher than Vernell Brown because Dallas Wilson and himself, he's a borderline five-star guy. So he's a high 4-star. He's 6'3", 195. I think DJ Legway is going to love him. As a guy who was very solid in high school against a solid strength of schedule. He's good on the field speed-wise. His testing, he's faster than Quincy Porter going to Ohio State, though he's the same size. I think that he's pretty physical. He has a nice ability to go up and get the ball. He's going to be a great outside receiver. In some ways, I don't think he's the most nuanced route runner. I don't think he's the most physical. But I think that he has a very high ceiling. Think of like a Brian Thomas Jr. type of player. I'm not saying that's what I expect of him. I do not. I don't know that Florida develops guys like that either. But there is, I guess, more upside, in my opinion, with the Dallas Wilson going to Florida compared to a Vernell Brown.
I will say, at least in the past few years, now it's not all there was Graham Mertz throwing the ball for a couple of those years and everything, but it's been a lot of those shorter routes at Florida. It's been a lot of that quick game. Now, obviously going to DJ Lagway, he's definitely pushing the ball a little more down the field, doing, having bigger plays. So hopefully we can get to that point. As a Gator fan, I'm hoping we do get to that point. But I will say, obviously, there's only so many positions on the field and all that kind of stuff. But, what if they want to what if they're showing us like that's what they want to do? They want that quick game. They want that short game. We see that Vernell Brown has that elite speed. And honestly, like Eugene Wilson has been a I don't want to say a disappointment or anything like that, but like Eugene Wilson has not been some spectacular player. I know a lot of people have him ranked highly because of what he did as a true freshman, but he kind of has fallen off since then. He's not really doing anything. Obviously his numbers as far as like ADOT and yak and all that kind of stuff, aren't really, or maybe not yak, but ADOT and yards per reception are, fairly low because of how he plays his game. What if they want to use somebody with like truly elite speed, like a Vernell Brown or that kind of thing? Just thoughts. I'm not saying any of it's right or wrong. I just thoughts that are popping into my head. But I will be interested to see how Wilson and Brown end up there. Ultimately, I have them within 3 or 4 spots of each other. So like I'm kind of with you. Like you said that you had Wilson ahead. It seems like that would probably be consensus when it's all said and done. I'm not even, I guess we'll have to follow spring reports and do all that kind of stuff and see who's standing out and doing all that. And maybe I'll have to make that switch as well. But it's not like I'm saying, oh, well, this guy sucks, and this guy's great or anything like that either.
Yeah, no, absolutely. To put some things into perspective, though, I don't know that Vernell Brown is quite that elite speed difference-making type of guy. He ran a 10.9 as far as his fastest 100-meter dash. And this is, again, at 170 pounds. And I'll bring you back to Jerome Miles at 215 pounds. That's 45 pounds heavier. He ran a 10.3. A 10.36. And so Vernell Brown at that 10.91 is just slow little guy in the background as Jerome Miles is lapping him. It's wild. So I guess just another shout out for Jerome Miles out there. Get healthy, guy. I heard he's going to run track in the spring. That's what the C2C guys are telling me. I don't know if it's true, but Jerome Miles recovering that fast from an ACL tear. That's Adrian Peterson-like recovery abilities from an ACL. If things go smoothly, right? If everything's on track and that's actually true, which I don't know if it is, but that's what I've been hearing. So,
but going straight line speed isn't really the problem with ACL tears, right? It's more of your juking and jiving and all that.
Correct. But to be able to go full speed, full effort and train in that capacity, that soon after an ACL rehab is very impressive. It's not just
Sure.
running in a straight line, it's competing at a very like a state champ caliber level
Sure.
type of thing is just unheard of, really, that fast after ACLs, at least outside of the guys who just have amazing healing abilities. So I don't know. I mean, I can't pretend to know exactly like where Jerome Miles is today in that recovery and truly if he's going to run this track season or if he just wants to. I don't think track season has even started quite yet. I know it's just right around the corner, I suppose, but up here in Minnesota, we still have snow. So won't be on the tracks quite yet.
Not in where is he? Ole Miss, not in Mississippi. I can tell you that much. All right, so I feel like we have a pretty clear tier break here. Would you agree with that, or do you have any other names that you'd like to throw into this? I will say like top 2 tiers.
Yeah, I actually had a tier break after like the Cleek Lockett, Taylor, Jerome Miles, and Decoria Moore, of course, at the top. So that's where I had my tier break. And so we could lump Caleb Cunningham in there and just say, okay, we somewhat agree there. I do have a little bit of just a small break off. A couple guys that I really like here. I'll be curious if you have any guys that you also like in this tier. I mean, I have Elijah Thomas, who's actually tagged as an athlete. He's going to Oklahoma. I really do like him as a playmaker. CJ Wiley, Georgia wide receiver. Definitely, that big wide receiver, that outside type of guy. And Jamie French, a Texas wide receiver. So you'll notice that there's two. So far tonight, we've mentioned 2 separate Georgia wide receivers and Texas wide receivers that are at least within my top 10 in ranks. The chances of both of them hitting for both of those schools is not super high, but there's a reason I have, for example, Taylor and Khalil Lockett ahead in that tier ahead of a CJ Wiley and Jamie French. It doesn't mean that Wiley and French are bad players, but I think that they're not quite on that same level. I assume that you agree with me there. Are those guys that are next up for you at all, John?
So I think that our top 10, let's see, you said Thomas, right?
Yep.
So, okay, so that's 11 players from Decorian Moore down to Elijah Thomas is my top 11. I know you said that you had Wilson ahead of Vernell Brown. Do you have Brown still in your top 10 or top 11 players there, or you have him outside?
Yeah,
Okay.
Vernell Brown, I'm struggling. I had him at as low as 13 and 11 is where I currently have him. So
I think we have the exact same top 10 besides Vernell Brown. That's the only difference. But everyone else is exactly the same. Jamie French, Dallas Wilson, CJ Wiley, and Elijah Thomas as my next player. And then I did a manual adjustment on Quincy Porter, so he kind of moved into that range as well.
Okay. Yeah, Elijah Thomas. I mean, he is somebody that I probably am at least the most excited for out of this bunch. Not saying that it will truly materialize because he had this elite senior year production, but it was against truly terrible competition. But he had like 1,800 receiving yards and 26 receiving touchdowns at 25 yards per reception. That is just outstanding. So going to Oklahoma where it's kind of wide open, really, there's not that much as far as proven talent there. At 6 foot 185 pounds, he moves like a Zay Flowers and Antonio Brown type of guy. He's a little taller than those guys, in fact, though, too. So just has those natural skills to be a playmaker and movement abilities to be pretty great, in my opinion. I think he's going to be a great route runner. I think that he can run all sorts of assortments of routes and even contribute on the ground and in the return game if needed. So I think there's a very good shot that Elijah Thomas breaks that year 1 0 mark for Oklahoma. I don't know that he would play any other position than wide receiver. That's just seemingly how it's trending for him. But I guess being an athlete tag, there's maybe a chance he does play on defense. I don't even know what he plays on defense, to be honest. I just know on offense he is very good. So stay tuned there. You're going to want to be, before drafting him, very tuned into what he's going to end up playing. But it sounds like wide receiver is the one. And I'm actually surprised that you have him that high.
Well, yeah, I mean, you had mentioned him earlier, so I made sure to get him in here because I don't always throw the athletes in, although I probably should at least go through. But like I'd say probably it seems like 75% of them end up being defense. And so, I don't go too crazy with the athletes because even if they played a little bit of wide receiver, a little bit of running back or whatever in high school, a lot of times if they're coming in as an athlete, it's because they're not that good at that position. And so they end up going to the defensive side where you can utilize your speed and all that, even though you're not that great of a route runner, or you're not that great at this or whatever. But with him, it really seemed like, even just looking at what 247 had as a write up, just saying like he seems like a wide receiver. He doesn't seem like a DB. He doesn't seem like, a defensive player or whatever. He seems like he's going to be focused on being a wide receiver. Going to Oklahoma, we expect him to, get on the field and do, we've seen pretty damn good things from Oklahoma, at least in the recent past. Obviously not everything's exactly the same as it has been and everything. We know Lincoln Riley went off to a different situation and all that, but I still have, I still believe that Oklahoma can put solid players into the NFL and all that. So, with that being said, like I said, I felt like there was a tier break there. So now I'm willing to kind of take more chances and say, okay, let's give this athlete a chance and see what he's got. CJ Wiley, is graded out higher than him, and he's going to Georgia, but we already know Georgia is pretty stout at wide receiver right now. I love London Humphreys. We already talked about Taylon Taylor, that seems like an extremely exciting prospect going over there. Colby Young is actually coming back to college for another year because he was a JUCO player, and so he's getting that extra year of eligibility. Like, there's so many players that are still there. It's just so hard to say, oh yeah, all of a sudden he's going to get on the field. CJ Wiley is going to get on the field and just be a stud. So it's hard to get overly excited about him. But I actually had one more player that is tied with Elijah Thomas there. And I was wondering, because he's definitely not what you would call your prototypical size, your prototypical this and that and everything. He's definitely more of, I don't want to say an outlier, but looking more and more like an outlier for NFL purposes nowadays. But Derek Meadows going to Alabama, 6'5". I've seen him actually listed at 6'6" as well, 200 pounds. But they're talking, he's on the freaks list. They're talking about how athletic he is. They're talking about how he's mossing people in 7-on-7s and all this other stuff. Seems like a pretty exciting player, albeit not a huge like mega producer in college or anything like that. Do you have any kind of excitement for Meadows there, or is that a player that you seem to be out on?
Yeah, I do seem to be pretty out on Meadows. He's inside my top 20, but it's just I am lower on him for sure. Not in my top 10 or 12 or so. He's in a big tier with like the 15, 16, 17, 18, all the way up to 21 guys. So for me, for Meadows, he's just so reminiscent of like Caleb Odom from last season for Alabama. Big, tall, really tall guy. Don't really know what to do with him. But there's lots of things going Derek Meadows' way. And I think that the Johnny Wilson comp has been used for him before. Not a bad comp. Kind of interesting. But there's that big play production. I just don't know. I don't know what the role is going to be there ultimately. Obviously, we know he's not going to be the alpha at Alabama anytime soon. Can he even break into that top 3 wide receiver wise? Maybe, but definitely not top 2. Derek Meadows, he's like 6'6", so he starts getting into that almost unmanageably tall. But it's interesting. He was previously committed to LSU, and fun fact, he's a former 5-star for 247 at one point. So it's like they liked him, but were they just falling in love with the LSU spot? That's other thing. Easy just to say, oh, this guy's going to LSU. He must be a 5-star. He has some big play production. I think that there's a chance he has the highest upside from that current tier within the guys like 15 to 20 or so in the ranks. He definitely has the highest upside of that group. I'll give him that.
Yeah, and he's a track athlete. He has some like first places in the hurdles and things like that. I mean, he definitely seems to be athletic on top of just the size. So it's not that like plotter that's that they can't separate and all that. Obviously there's talks of him possibly becoming a tight end or something like that at some point, and it's definitely a possibility, although at 200 pounds he has some work to do if he's going to do that. but he's just that next player. Like I said, I'm starting to fall more and more out of love as we get further down this list. I don't know about you, if there's anyone that you like truly love. This is start, at least for me. I don't want to speak for you, but for me, this is starting to get into a point of the model where I'm kind of out. I don't really care to be in on too many of these other players. I mean, I'm looking at players in the past that were in this range, and you have Barry and Brown, Talon Shetron, Dante Thornton Jr. from the 22 class. Let's see, Cordell Russell, Ryan Niblett, Shelton Sampson from 23, and then 24, Zion Kearney, Courtney Crutchfield, Draylon Miller, which I know some people are in on Miller. I'm kind of out, so that doesn't really affect me. Jordan Shipp. So there's, not to say that none of these players will ever do anything, but it's definitely a range where I am basically willing to look at in other directions at this point.
Yeah, no, very, very fair. I guess the only other guy, I guess we didn't really talk about Jamie French at Texas. We talked about CJ Wiley. I think you summed it up pretty well at Georgia. Not the most promising landing spot for a big wide receiver, because who are they bringing in the transfer portal? Noah Thomas. Thomas is what, 6'6", coming in from Texas A&M. He's probably going to play a role there. Zachariah Branch, probably going to start in the slot. Like him, hate him, he's going to be a guy they want to get the ball. Guess who else is returning? Colby Young, so big outside type of receiver. Dylan Bell, do it all wide receiver, can play outside, inside, etc. I think they still have Nitro Tuggle. I don't know why he stays there, but I think he's still there.
Right.
Yeah, and like you said, Talon Taylor, who is a better recruit in my opinion. CJ Wiley is just the odd man out. Probably year 1-0. And, slim pickings for him to actually carve himself out a future. I just bumped him down another tier. Just from you and I just talking about
Yeah,
it.
I mean, as you're talking, it's like, holy crap, man, what are the odds?
Yeah, but you never know. All right, good players, sometimes they just ball out. I honestly, the first thing I thought of when I watched him, I'm like, dang, could this guy develop into like a Ted McMillan or something? Like, he's fast. He's like a 10'9" guy at a 6'4", 195. Pretty good. I mean, not everybody can be Jerome Miles or anything, but CJ Wiley, pretty fast. Yeah, definitely some physicality underneath route running. Like, for a big guy, yeah, it impressed me, but again, is he going to stand out there at Georgia? Probably not. Any other guys I wanted to mention? I guess Jamie French.
You started talking about French, and then you got sidetracked with Wiley there. I know he was a huge name in the really early on process. That there was a lot of people that had him as possibly like wide receiver 2, wide receiver 3, and maybe even possibly wide receiver 1 for some people really early on. And then more recently, it seems like people have really fallen out of love. I don't know if it's from some of the All-Star games and things like that, but it just seems like French has lost that luster.
Yeah, no, absolutely he has. Don't have a lot to add there other than still like him. I just don't have him as high as Kalik Lockett. So there's a chance he beats out Lockett though, and French could be a contributor year 1 because his skill set's not bad, but he just kind of had a down senior year and doesn't seem like he's on a great trajectory right now. But solid enough on the field speed, but his testing's pretty poor. So don't really know what to do with French other than just keep him in that tier where it's like, could be okay. But probably move him actually below Quincy Porter in my ranks. So probably at like wide receiver 8-ish for Jamie French in the class. But other guys, I mean, I have not heard really anybody talking about this guy, but Kelshawn Johnson going to Texas A&M. I think the reason for that is because we do have a Jerome Miles. We have some transfer guys going into Texas A&M. How much opportunity is there? I just got done talking about CJ Wiley, very talented guy going to Georgia. Well, Kelshawn Johnson, very talented guy going to Texas A&M. Just ultimately, I don't think he's going to make a huge difference there. So maybe I shouldn't have him this high. I just love the talent itself. Terry Shelton, TCU wide receiver. C2C guys in general, our team likes him. the composite has him a little lower at wide receiver 29, but he is a pretty fast and a versatile athlete, basketball background. He's 6'4", 200. We know how TCU is with some of these wide receiver recruits. Maybe not always the most polished, but they can put out some good production and be big risers in the Devy sphere. And I think that he flashes enough as a athlete and all that size and athleticism that we should get excited for him at TCU. I think they'll pass it a bunch this year. I think he gets involved as a true freshman, or there's a good chance of that. So certainly Terry Shelton is another name to take note of.
I actually just came across some rankings, and I won't call them out because I'm not trying to like put somebody else's rankings out there, but I just found somebody who has CJ Wiley ahead of Taylor Taylor in their ranks. So I mean, that thought is definitely out there. And sorry, I was completely sidetracked from that. But I mean, I heard you talk about Kelshawn Johnson. Who was the other player you were mentioning?
Yes, Terry Shelton, TCU. Keep an eye on him. I think he's a contributor from day one. Good landing spot. Yeah. I mean,
I have quite a few names here. Kelshawn Johnson is admittedly pretty low for me, but I mean, he's also pretty low in the composite ranks. I think you had mentioned he was like wide receiver 29 or something like that. Pretty. He's only at 0.9257 here. Substantially lower than you're getting with your even Elijah Thomas's, CJ Wiley's, like that level. I have another like tier break and players that you haven't mentioned yet, I don't believe, are Travis Smith out of Tennessee, Donovan Olagbode, Mizzou, Dalen McCutcheon, Texas, Joshua Moore, Miami, Tayron Francis, LSU. Any of those names jump out? Anybody that you actually like there, or is that just a dead tier?
Yeah, McCutcheon I like. It's just the landing spot. He's the third among my mic. I don't know. McCutcheon's third amongst the incoming wide receiver freshmen. That's not great at Texas. That already has some talent there. I know they've graduated some. They still have Wingo. They still have Moore. And Moore, unfortunately, is going to play in that slot role for Texas. He's locked in there. That's where McCutcheon would ultimately make his impact. So if we see some injuries for Texas in that wide receiver core, McCutcheon certainly could skyrocket up. He is a guy who could take advantage of the opportunity. Absolutely. Is he going to get the opportunity? I think not. I really am not confident that McCutcheon will get an opportunity as a year one player. And so that year 1-0 is going to be unfortunate there. Let's see, Andrew Marsh, Michigan. I actually like I don't know. I like someone else going to Michigan, Jacob Washington, almost slightly more than Marsh. Marsh was kind of like Quincy Porter for me. Just didn't quite see it there with him. But again, good production in Texas. Pretty good recruit going to Michigan to team up with a great quarterback recruit. I don't know. I think that there's some issues there with Andrew Marsh, but probably should shout out him as a player. I have Donovan Olagbode, similarly high for Missouri. It's just, he played at IMG, so it's good level of competition, sure, but it's just going to lack production. Guys who go there, they do, and Carnell Tate did as well, but you got to see past that, and I think that overall he's a solid enough player. Maybe he is similar to a Carnell Tate skill-wise, but I just don't think he's a special player at the same time. So certainly could factor in there at Missouri year one, and then let's see. There is an LSU guy. I'm not super sold on him, but I'll at least shout him out here. Taron Francis, or Taron Francis. I don't know if you said him, but
yeah, I said I called him Tayron. I don't know if that's how exactly you pronounce it, but I was actually just going to ask you about him because I brought him up in that grouping, and I'm looking at our lads and just looking at the ambiguous nature of their wide receiver core. Like, is it impossible to think that he could carve out a role in year one? I mean, like Berrien Brown had some excitement to his name in years past, but he hasn't really been doing all that much. And we can't say that he's really taken steps forward in his game. Is it crazy to think that possibly like a Francis could, even eat into his role or even possibly take over that role at some point in his freshman season. Because beyond that, you have Aaron Anderson, who hardly ever done anything. Nick Anderson, who has been injured and obviously moved over from Oklahoma. Then you just have a bunch of names that have never really done anything beyond that. So it's pretty wide open, I would say.
Yeah, I mean it's wide open as far as like studs there, but it's kind of crowded because of all the guys who have some set roles for that team. And so yes, there's some opportunity, but you said Nick Anderson probably starts on the outside unless he's just dust at this point from injuries.
Sure.
Barry and Brown probably coming in to start, or at least play a pretty big role. Aaron Anderson, he is a locked-in starter regardless of lackluster early production in his career. And you got Chris Hilton, who kind of a head case injury guy, but again, he's going to play on the outside. He's that speed wide receiver for them. And then you could even say like Xavier Thomas and some other guys factor in. So is there hope for Francis? Yeah, there's a little bit of hope, but I don't know if it's as much as you might think, because we think about, LSU doesn't have any studs right now. There could be opportunity for a stud freshman. There's a reason he's rated as lowly as he is in the recruiting services. I think they've tried to bump him up, but they can't because, I mean, I agree with the recruit services where they have him. His athleticism on the field did not match his testing times. He's like a 10.86 100-meter guy. He had some solid enough production, but just on the field, I don't know. He looked physical. And there's a reason why his nickname is Man-Child. Taryn Manchild Francis at 6'2", 200 pounds. He's kind of a beast out there, but I think he plays like a Joshua Palmer, and that's not the most inspiring play style.
Yeah, like I said, I'm not overly excited about this range of the list as well. Honestly, I was just trying to list any other names. I don't know if there's any other names you need to get into. Honestly, I'm looking at the time. I'm thinking maybe we call this one quits after, if you have any honorable mentions or anything, and then we can do the quarterbacks and the running backs another night, if that's okay with you, because I'm just thinking otherwise we might not be able to give those other positions their due diligence.
Yeah, no, that's very fair. And we have so many tight ends to talk about, that's going to take a while tonight. No, I'm just kidding. No tight end talk tonight, but I'll throw out a couple more names because I do think that, yes, focusing on the wide receivers in this podcast would be smart at this rate. And you mentioned Travis Smith going to Tennessee, highly rated guy, but I mean, he was a great senior producer, 6'3", 200 pounds, sounds just like Cam Coleman, right? I think he's more of a Hakeem Williams. I really don't love him. I know he's like wide receiver 10 in the composite. I have him wide receiver 21 for me. I am a fair amount lower. I just really think there's zero polish to his game. He has great hands, good deep ball tracking. I just don't think that he's got the speed of like a Cam Coleman. I think Cam Coleman was more of an athletic player, and there's some ambiguity though at Tennessee. So certainly Travis Smith, maybe he could prove me wrong if he just speeds up his game a little bit. He could be awesome at Tennessee. He's in that tier with a lot of the guys we just mentioned. So it's not like I nuked him and I don't have him ranked or anything. No, I will throw, you mentioned Joshua Moore. I just have no real information. He's a wide receiver at going to Miami.
He plays football.
he plays football. He's a guy apparently, but I can't find any information about his senior season. His old film was lackluster, but it was old film. It was like sophomore year film. I'm like, how am I supposed to evaluate you, man? Like put some actual film out there if you're good. There's no stats out there. There's no film that I could find. I don't know. I don't get the deal with Joshua Moore going to Miami until I actually set eyes on him and understand why he's that high. I'm just going to assume that he's pumped up there because he's going to Miami. But Travis Smith, I do think there's a fair chance of him rising up. And I think another guy in that same region who has a little bit of upside is John Anthony Hall, Stanford wide receiver. For 247, they really like him a good amount. I think he's in the top 10 or 15 for them, and good multi-sport athlete. I mean, good enough production. He's a smooth guy. I think he's going to be an interesting replacement for A.M. Minor there. And I know, everybody is predicting that production will go elsewhere. I think John Anthony Hall could certainly step in there and be a factor for Stanford as a true freshman. How illustrious is that production going to look? Well, that's another story, right? Stanford's not exactly breaking records out there in the passing game, but he could stick out, beat that year 1-0 mark. John Anthony Hall, Stanford's pretty good.
I'm actually trying to see where he is in the composite because I don't have Hall on my list, so I'm interested to see where he is. I'm scrolling.
He's 27 in the composite. I think he got nuked. Like some recruiting services must really dislike him.
There he is,
Yeah, because he was wide receiver 14 for 247, and traditionally they're pretty solid, but the wide receiver grades, I trust them. That's why I reference them, use their site and their rankings more than I do for like ESPN or Rivals or some of those.
Yeah, so I mean, I'm looking at it right now. I mean, obviously he's not a highly graded player in the composite by any means. Stanford's not a terrible spot. We've seen some solid players go to Stanford, and Stanford's actually put some quality players in the NFL. So I don't even hate the landing spot or anything. Obviously, I wish they had a better quarterback situation going on right now, but I don't know what to think about the player. I don't hate the size or anything like that. I don't necessarily love the grading, but we'll have to see where he ends up when it's all said and done. Obviously, we know, Amanor is going on to the NFL, and both you and I have expressed that we don't exactly love Mosley. So maybe Anthony Hall here can have John Anthony Hall could have his time in the sun as well.
Yeah. And some other guys I should probably shout out. Jalen Cooper, SMU wide receiver. Again, it's SMU. Just like, how much do we want to prop that guy up or invest in drafts? I mean, you want to have him on your watch list, absolutely. But Jalen Cooper going to SMU he's a very slight framed guy, very skinny at this point, to my knowledge. He's like in the 165 range, but he's 6'1" at least. 6'1.5" is what I saw listed. And his production was really, really intriguing. Awesome his senior year and junior year, even more so. I mean, he had 1,600 yards and 23 receiving touchdowns his junior year. So 1,600 or 1,661 receiving yards. Very nice. In Texas, even if it was lower level of competition in Texas, that's still something I take note of. I think he's a speedy guy. I just don't know how well-rounded he is. He's not within my top 20, but certainly still pretty high for me. And then Malik Clark, South Carolina wide receiver. Get another great athlete, very fast, 10.5 guy. I think he won state in his conference or his division. 4.39 type of speed is what I'm seeing out there. I guess the C2C team has shouted him out. That's the biggest reason that he's this high on my ranks. I'm not like wowed by him necessarily, but I think he has the athleticism. And at South Carolina, if you believe in Lenora Sellers, if you truly think that he is a good quarterback prospect, he's going to have to put up some stats. He's going to have to throw it this season. And at South Carolina, they need some athletic dudes who can catch the ball. So receiving option, SEC breakouts. I mean, that's good enough dart throw, I suppose. In the SEC, if he can, really make his mark, Malik Clark could be a interesting true freshman sleeper.
Actually, I was just looking at him right before you mentioned him because he's the highest graded player that we had not mentioned yet. And that's not to say that he's really overly highly graded or anything like that, but he is the highest graded player that we hadn't mentioned yet. And it just I started looking at his profile, and they're talking about how he's basically like a deep ball threat. You were talking about the speed and everything, and thinking about like these players, these quarterbacks that they have that rushing ability, they have that rushing threat. A lot of times they have that big arm, and what can they do? They can hit that deep ball. Look at Jalen Miller, look at Anthony Richardson, look at Lenora Sellers. I wonder if we can see that big play ability with Clark, even though it might not necessarily turn into like, eye-popping numbers, huge college production or anything like that. Could it be enough to where, he can get his name on people's radars when it's all said and done because of some big plays, especially if we're just talking about year 1-0 theory. All it takes is what two, 3 plays, and he could break the the thresholds there. So we could look for him to possibly get a couple big plays here in the first year and see if he can get on radars, like I said.
Absolutely. I mean, he's kind of like a Mario Craver in some ways. He's not the same size, not necessarily the same type of player exactly, but a guy who was able to flash some explosiveness, and now he has to be on our radars as a solid enough true freshman. So hopefully we see something similar out of a Malik Clark. I do have about 15, 16 more guys that I need to grade out, not talk about tonight. I need to grade out, watch, kind of look a little deeper into their production. So there's a couple of interesting landing spots amongst those guys. I mean, Latsier Brooks for Alabama, Phillip Bell, Ohio State. Let's see, there is another guy for Oklahoma, guy for Georgia, guy for Ole Miss, USC. So, definitely interested to see if any of those guys pop. And there's some other schools that I got to look into as well, some other fairly solid recruits. But, we've said this in the past. How deep do you actually want to go into the wide receivers here? I mean, I guess it's hard to find that hidden gem if you don't keep looking, right? Keep doing your research. But like you said, the hit rates really do decrease here as you get into these middle to lower tiers of our rankings.
It does. And I'm not saying that you should like go crazy just because this happens, but looking at previous years, Jamar Chase was, not quite at the levels that we're talking about right now, but he wasn't that far ahead. He was really considered, not necessarily a great prospect at the time. Terrace Marshall Jr. was considered a much better prospect going to LSU, and obviously we know Marvin Harrison Jr. wasn't considered the prospect that Emeka Egbuka was. And there's obviously there's other examples of that as well. Malik Neighbors was a 0.9112 in the composite score. Complete unknown. I remember that was Malik Neighbors is probably one of the first players that I can truly say I remember picking up on Neighbors. I remember Beth picking up on Neighbors and going, why isn't he being ranked as highly as he was? But it had absolutely nothing to do with his recruit score or anything like that. So, I mean, there's obviously hits here at these lower levels, but, beyond the fact that you could say Ohio State, LSU, like these schools and stuff like that, beyond that, it's really difficult to even say like who's going to hit and all that. And then, going back to Neighbors, people really, even with the year that he had his freshman season and then his sophomore season, people still weren't even 100% on board yet. It really took that junior year before everyone was like, oh yeah, by the way, Malik Neighbors is a stud.
Yeah, no, that's a good point. And I guess Chris Olave was another guy kind of buried somewhat in his class. And he's like in the wide receiver, 30s, 40s, something like that, depending on the service or the composite. So he was pretty low. So you certainly can get some, get some steals later on in the draft, but they have to be in the right spot at the right time. That is for sure. And for every, one guy out of 15 that's in that range, you'll get a hit, but the rest of them, never going to do anything for your C2C squad or your Devy squad. So I mean, don't want to necessarily overinvest, just taking tons of those dart throws. But if you become convinced or really excited about one or two of these guys, I can't blame you for trying to take shots deep, especially if you have some extra picks. I like leagues that allow you to actually accumulate and maybe draft more guys and hold more guys than you have roster spots for. And then you can cut down as the season approaches. Like, it's a strategy. I think it should be allowed in leagues. Again, maybe that's a different conversation for a different day, but certainly there's some guys that you want to take shots on, and there's ways to increase your hit rates. So we talked about those earlier in the pod, but stay tuned as we kind of keep breaking down these prospects, and hopefully you'll be able to get some helpful information, some things that you didn't even know necessarily about these players. And that can help you in your rookie supplemental draft, startups, all of that.
Absolutely. Well, I think we did a very in-depth look at your true freshman wide receiver class here. We really don't talk about tight ends, and it's not even like, oh, we hate tight ends or anything, but it's just so tough. There's people that have done a lot more research on that position than we have, and even they seem to do pretty poorly at the position. Last year, people were getting overly excited about Caleb Odom and players like that, and it's just like. It doesn't seem to work out that way, and you seem to wait 2, 3, 4, sometimes even 5 years for them to break out. And so like we'll worry about those players when it happens, but we will have to dive into the QBs and the running backs here. There's a lot of players to talk about, although there are it's not, I wouldn't call it the greatest running back class, but there are definitely some players that I'm interested in. And once we get into the running backs on the next pod here, I have one player in particular that I'm very interested to see where Aaron has him ranked, because I have not heard him getting a lot of hype. And maybe it'll be one of those instances where he goes, oh, well, this is why, and that's why, and all that kind of stuff. But I cannot figure it out for the life of me. But we'll have to leave you with that cliffhanger. We don't want to give too much away. We're already at the 1.5 hour mark and everything. We appreciate you guys being here. We will be back in your ears as soon as possible. But for now, we're going to go ahead and cash out. See you guys.